Good morning. It's Wednesday, and we are still talking about our story elements this week. We've talked about characters and we've talked about setting. And today we are going to talk a little bit about what we call problem and solution. And sometimes it's referred to as the problem and the resolution. Resolution, solution, they mean about the same thing. So if you see that word, just know that they're very close in meaning. So you were listening, hopefully you listened to this story, Alexander Who Used to Be Rich, last Sunday. And we're going to use that example in just a few minutes to talk about problem and resolution, or problem and solution. So if you know the story of the princess and the pea, then that's what we're going to use, that story we're going to use to kind of lead into our discussion today. The princess in that story there's a problem. And what happens is that there is some kind of problem or conflict, and then the characters work out that problem, and then everything is solved, or we say resolved, or ended by the end of the story. It's also, we need to point out, though, that sometimes in a story, they don't solve the problem, that the problem is not resolved, and it kind of leads the reader wondering what happens towards the end. So a problem is something that goes wrong in the story, and sometimes we call that the conflict. So what was the problem in The Princess and the Pea? Well, if you remember, if you've read or listened to that story, the princess was kind of needing to find a prince to marry. And one night, a princess knocks on the door of a castle, and she is claiming to be a real princess. But the problem is that we don't know if she's being truthful or not. They did not know if she was really a princess. And so that was kind of the problem that arose in the course of that story. So the resolution is how the problem is solved. What happens at the end to end it all and kind of bring it to a close. So what was the resolution in The Princess and the Pea? Well, at the end of the story, the woman finds a pea. She can feel a very tiny, small little pea under her huge stack of mattresses. And that proved that this woman was a real princess, just like she thought she had said she was and claimed to be. And so the problem in that story was resolved, and the story came to a close. So that was that story. Now, today you listened to Alexander Who Used to Be Rich, last Sunday. And I want to take a minute and think about the problem in that story. The main problem is that, see if you can pause this video and figure that out. If you talked a little bit about the problem being Alexander, who has some money and he is really struggling with whether or not he should spend that money or not. And he's wanting to save it, but then he ends up spending some of it on things like gum and things like that in the story. So the main conflict is kind of within himself, and Alexander is really struggling with that concept of saving his dollar. And so if we think about the resolution, the ending to that, pause this video again and see if you can figure out what that might be. So if you were thinking about the resolution in this story, Alexander Who Used to Be Rich, last Sunday, think about what happened at the end. And what we know is that, Alexander, his problem was that he couldn't save his money. He wanted to spend it. At the end of the story, he kind of realizes that he bought some things that were unimportant, things that he didn't really care about as much towards the end. So even though the resolution or the solution was not really a happy one, he did come to realize that his purchases were not the best. So that's kind of what we would call the resolution, or how the problem kind of came to an end. Again, it's not always a happy, clear-cut ending. Sometimes a story leaves us hanging a little bit. We kind of have to figure out some things on our own. So that's kind of a summary of problem and solution. And we'll see you tomorrow for a different read aloud and discussion.